Good morning. I'm Margie O'Driscoll, and on behalf of the Center for Innovation's Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. The mission of the center is to reshape the architecture, engineering, and construction industry for a better tomorrow. So thank you for joining us on that journey. We'd like to take a moment to express our gratitude to the many sponsors who make our work possible. Thank you so much. The Center for Innovation recently concluded our Fall Forum, which included talks with people charged with rebuilding the Ukraine, the Bosch innovation story, and a deep dive with several building owners about their view of innovation in 2050. If you missed any of these webinars, please be sure to check out all our past webinars on our YouTube channel. In addition, our webinars are now available as podcasts, so please check them out if you'd like to listen to them in the future. Today, we're going to explore something very interesting. What happens when a building developer unlocks innovation by adding funding for R&D to a project? Today's speaker, Doug Moore, will describe the South Landing development in Spokane, Washington, a zero-carbon, zero-energy project. This project launched innovative marketing offerings and employed new innovative thinking to the development process. We will hear today the behind-the-scenes story. Here's a little bit of the background about today's speaker. Doug Moore has been instrumental in McKinstry's evolution from a local mechanical contractor into a nationally recognized leader of efficient, smart, and clean solutions for the built environment. He is passionate about next-generation construction techniques that deliver high-performance, cost-effective buildings and model environmental stewardship. His most recent focus has been on increasing the speed of building design and construction by industrializing processes in the supply chain. To be on the front line of the construction technology race, Doug and his team are also active angel investors in technology startups. He leverages his relationships with select startups to form strategic partnerships that accelerate McKinstry's ability to lead transformational change in the built environment. Welcome, Doug. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about this development in Spokane, Washington. So I'll give you a little background on McKinstry for context. We'll cover the ins and outs of the development, and then we'll talk about unlocking innovation and things that we did in the pro forma related to budget, and then where we often said yes to allow time for additional innovation. And one area that was pretty special for us was to retain control of the TI work as the developer. Do a recap. So McKinstry's values, you can see on the screen, we're really a people-first organization in many ways. Certainly our staff, our customers, our communities, and the rest of our values really come out of being people-first. So the company was started in 1960 as a small plumbing and piping company. And the founders of the company were really interested to add lines of business within mechanical contracting. So we became a full service design build mechanical contractor, and including fire sprinkler and architectural metals. We had a satellite operation in Portland, headquartered in Seattle. I started with the company in 1978. But we had another recession that we went through in the early 90s. And so, in our planning meetings, we looked at our cycle as a company, and we would ride the economy up and sort of ride it down as we followed the new construction waves. And we worked hard on some strategy to see if we couldn't level our revenues in down years. And that gave us a focus on existing buildings and the tagline for the life of your building, which was a real rallying cry. And after we did that, then we added additional lines of business, primarily focused on serving customers for the life of their building, not just to do new construction or major tenant improvements. So, again, 2 offices, even up through 2003. But as we started our energy efficiency work in 2000 as an ESCO or energy services company, that allowed us to start moving across the country. And so we do work in about 35 states now. We have an office staff of about 1,200 people, field staff of 1,000 to 1,500 in the Northwest, depending on the construction cycle. And, as we've evolved, we have come to these as we call core beliefs. Half the energy is wasted in the built environment and half of the labor in designing, building, and operating buildings is wasted. And these are generalizations, certainly, but we keep these in front of us because it points out how much customers need us in the built environment to take the waste out, either in energy or in labor, to lower cost. And it also continues to show us how much innovation opportunity there is in the built environment. And this is our vision. So the South Landing development. So the building you see in the front is the Catalyst building, and the building in the lower left behind the Morris Energy Center. And this is the location with an aerial view in Spokane. So there's an area in Spokane which is called the University District, and it is not a single university, it's co-located several universities. And then the district goes off the screen to the top, which is north. But the district also includes what you see on the bottom of the screen, and off the bottom of the screen, that's the south part of the district. And a footbridge was built across the railroad tracks. You can see they're kind of in the middle of the screen. It's a footbridge and bicycle bridge. And when it was built, it was called the Bridge to Nowhere because there is no university district happening on that side of the tracks. And so the community has desperately been trying to figure out a way to get the university district started. So this is our location. We just happen to be in that area. So this is our office and what was our manufacturing facility. We have recently built a new facility, or it's under construction. And this is the project site. This is South Landing. And so it's on the other side of these railroad tracks, and definitely in the path of progress for the universities. This is sort of a pencil sketch. The property is owned by the local utility, Avista. They're the electric and gas utility in the area. And they had planned a substation on that site. And as the bridge was built, and they thought, well, having the landing of the bridge be a substation is not the best for the universities. So let's change our plans. So they made this property available for development, and there still is then a stress because that area needed a substation. So that's a whole other story. But the utility has been a customer of ours for about 20 years, and through a turn of events, we became their developer. And certainly, the idea was to get a building underway. There was one university who had a large program for computer science and electrical engineering, and they needed at the time about 70 or 80,000 square feet. And so Avista wanted to get this building going and see if they could lock up that tenant and use this as a way to get the district started south of the tracks. So the initial pro forma was, a 5-story building, steel and concrete, and code minimum. But the university, the utility certainly didn't want a code minimum building. They were interested in how far energy could go in a project. And McKinstry, and signing up as the developer, our expertise is in certainly designing, building, and operating buildings, primarily from mechanical, electrical for systems. But from an energy point of view, we have a holistic look at buildings, and we wanted to see if we could do something special as well. The site actually includes 3 other parcels, which were for future buildings. So let's talk about budgeting. So we had the 130,000 square foot building, steel and concrete, complete through finish and operations in the pro forma. And in addition, we put a separate budget unrelated to the construction budget for, what you see there, 2.6 million. And we just had it labeled as, improving the building generically. And we did have line items, but there was no intent that the money would follow those line items. So that was our first step in trying to enable the building to have some additional features beyond minimum. Also, we worked with Eastern Washington University as an anchor tenant. They have a lot of their own buildings in a portfolio. We used comps from the area. We did some extensive energy modeling. And we came to an agreement on $1 per square foot per year for energy for the building that was to be built for their program. And that would include certainly their, evening use of classrooms and so on. And so the benefit they got was a fixed price, but a low escalation. So we put, I think it was a 3% escalation annually, which is lower than energy costs today are escalating. And so they saw that as a benefit for the life of their lease. And what we saw then was the opportunity to have all the energy spend in our op cost, so that we could look at things like this. So we said, hey, if we got all the way to zero energy, what's the value of that as an asset if we reduce the operating costs by $120,000 or $130,000 a year? And so by our calcs, that could increase the value of the asset by as much as $3 million. The utility said that if you do zero energy, you would get over $1 million in a utility rebate. So that's $4 million. And we said, well, okay, if we choose to either get all the way to zero energy, or at least let's start with a $3 million budget to selectively choose energy features for the building. The tenant improvement, we, as subcontractors and builders of buildings, we always have seen the hard stop that can happen with shell and core, and then the tenant maybe hires their own design team and brings in their own even build team potentially. That can really disrupt the idea and the holistic view of a building. It can be done certainly seamlessly, but we talked to the tenant and said, hey, would you entertain the idea if we actually retained complete turnkey control of your TI? And so we came to a cost agreement on that. And we even included their FF&E budget in that as well. We were interested to move that to our side of the fence because of all the IT work, especially because of the AV and security. We wanted that in our spend and in our control. And so we did that as well. So the 2.6 million plus 3 million is a little more than 5.5 million that we had set aside to work on building upgrades, and that was almost 10% of the construction budget, almost a 10% increase in the construction budget. And then, before any lines were put to paper for design, we certainly had a master schedule of basic blocks of work that had to get done to get the tenants in on time. And we there just started to identify, okay, well, let's look at mass timber. Let's also look at other sustainability upgrades for the building. And the idea was we thought all of that work would be done, certainly the structure done early, but other studies done by 50% DD. But what we found is that when you had money to spend on good ideas, that non-critical path ideas could extend beyond 50% DD. And so we're still in some regards exploring ideas on this building, and it's been delivered for 2 years. So as the design progresses, early we did change to CLT. We started to get renderings of what the interiors might look like. We then looked at what we could do to reduce the energy use on the building. And so the building envelope became a focus for a month. And at the end of that, we decided to go a passive house envelope. We certainly were going to put PV on the roof, but we looked at many different strategies for energy. The building grew in size. We added a half floor at the lowest level. The structural grid was optimized for classroom, which was a little hit to the budget. That was a smaller grid was more optimal for CLT. The CLT at the time was not a prescriptive path through the IBC, and so I think we had 8 different alternative means and methods, submittals for permitting. And then the EUI on the building, we would have been, we think, under 20 for maybe what you call typical office tenants, maybe not a technology office tenant for sure. But because of classroom use and computer science and computer labs, our EUI is about 24. So along the way, as we were looking at energy use and what we might achieve, we decided to go zero energy and use the BILFI certification. So, one of the areas that we spent some of that discretionary budget was countless energy runs and modeling. This is the most we've ever done on a building or set of buildings. And in this slide, this was just showing one snapshot of the annual heating and cooling requirement and what kinds of equipment we might use throughout the year. And where this started to become important is as we were working on what was going to be the central plant, we decided one of the energy use strategies was to put in a central plant instead of package equipment. We needed to know, what the loads were to start to size those components and do it with an energy efficiency point of view in mind. But then we started to look at zero carbon and what would that take, and we thought, hey, we've added all the risk we can handle with zero energy, so let's go ahead and take more risks. So we decided to go zero carbon as well, and that meant getting rid of the gas boiler plant and putting in an electric plant, and then certainly no gas in the building for heating of hot water, for any restaurant uses, and so on. So now as we start to think about the central plant, as design builders and estimators and understanding the cost of these systems, we decided to take a month and set up a model for the central plant that had all of the different types of equipment, the size options for the equipment, the energy performance for the equipment at each size and within certain operating parameters. And then we had to benchmark that against an ending EUI and the plant's allocation against the total EUI for the building, and then first cost for this plant. And so it was, like 40,000 runs in the end, but by spending a month and really funding a really good study, it made a very easy decision at the end. The second bar from the right is an EUI bar. Sorry, these are hard to read. And that right now is capped at 25. But what you see are three choices that were in there for plant options that kept us in the range of a 24 EUI and a reasonably low first cost. That was the whole game, was to figure out a cost-effective central plant. So building A was the building certainly that we were underway on, and we found ourselves without room for a central plant. The program grew for the anchor tenant. They ended up taking about 3/4 of the building, and we didn't have the ability to go underground. This whole site is basalt rock. We even had unexpected expense to do some blasting to get rock out. So we needed another slab on grade location. Fortunately, we had 3 other parcels, and so we decided to accelerate a second building. So we had a location for the plant, and we thought, well, we'll just do a 2-story building, and on the first floor somewhere we'll put this plant. The 2-story building, as a developer, was not a good idea. That didn't pencil in a performer. These are independent properties. So we decided to go ahead and make that a 4-story building so that it would pencil. And now we took on additional leasing risk. So the risk is compounded as we move along in the project. And then we decided, certainly the plant is going to go in this building, but we wanted it to be on storefront so we could showcase the plant to the community. The idea of this development, as it was evolving, was a public-private partnership around energy and the future of the built environment related to energy. And so we wanted a way that students on campus or the public walking by could see that. And there are displays that are activated there that show building operation and information about the site. So it was central heating, central cooling, but also we ran all the electricity through this plant, which was enabled because as we went zero energy, now zero carbon, central plant, the utility is getting ever more involved. I mean, certainly they're the champion of this project. It's on their property. They're an investor in these buildings. But they started to get ever more interested in what these buildings could mean to them as a pilot and study in the operation of buildings in their territory and the future of operating buildings. So they chose to, through their abilities, allow all the electricity to run through here, which was unique. But more importantly, it started getting them into the conversation of a grid operated building, and this became an eco district with serving 2 initial buildings, but also it has connections for the next 2 buildings. And so this central operation was really interesting to the utility. And then they're the ones that brought up this conversation of, well, certainly we started with a generic building profile on the left. We made it more energy efficient in the middle. Now we've gone zero energy, and so there's PV to offset the annual utility expense. And their conversation was, we already have all this variability on the grid with renewables and all that world we live in. And now, you know, the world as it goes zero energy, look at the other compounding effect that we have in serving buildings that have widely varying loads, either by day or annual. And so, you know, this was, you know, their interest in how buildings should operate on the grid. And to do that, they joined us as a partner in this eco district. So they're a partner in that, and it's a separate entity. And we expanded the thermal storage, and we have battery storage added to the plant, although the supply chain has caused us a problem there. The batteries are not yet delivered. We thought they would be here by now, but they're not. So as an example, in the thermal storage, we put substantially more storage in than we needed just for the energy efficiency interest of being zero energy. We can carry the building for a full day on a peak heating day in the winter. And these thermal storage tanks are changeover, so they can be heating or cooling. So with batteries and thermal storage, now we have a real opportunity with the utility as a partner to look at how we can decouple these buildings from the grid. So we have a lot of expertise in real-time monitoring buildings and the operation of buildings from a thermal comfort and an energy use point of view, but adding the grid component into the strategy certainly was new to our team, from, you know, writing those algorithms and understanding that in detail. And so with the utility, we formed another company, an operating company, to operate these properties, but also to provide the service to other customers, so that we can do energy as a service, where not only are you serving the needs of the building for thermal comfort and low energy use, but also being able to take grid signals through utility and actually either get hired by utilities elsewhere or their customers. So that's another company that came out of this. So we got the building delivered on time. September 2020 is when students were in class. Zero energy, zero carbon. The second building, which had to catch up, it was quite a complication, that when we decided to put the plant there, it now had to finish on time with the first building, but it started substantially later than the first building. But it came on in September 2020. And now the bridge to nowhere, this is what you see when you walk across the bridge. So now let's rewind the clock a little bit. I skipped over the tenant improvement topic. So again, turnkey TI work, including FF&E, and the rendering you saw earlier in a wood building. We started to think about the MEP systems, and we were the design builder of those systems. And so what would happen if we did what the industrial chic for other steel and concrete buildings, and we thought, well, that's probably not the best look for our building, because this is what our building looked like. And initially we had a budget for ceilings for steel and concrete, and when it became CLT and we decided we wanted no ceilings. But then are we going to be the biggest problem in mucking up the look of the building when you look up with our mechanical, electrical, and data systems? And so we thought, well, how do we organize against that? And the architect may well need some ceiling clouds for acoustics. And if that were to happen, maybe we could talk the architect into using them throughout the space, and that might give us a way to land MEP and data devices and begin to organize ourselves visually. And so that's what we did. So we put ceiling clouds in as a design. We had to develop and create those, both with finishes. We went through several iterations of how do you build them, and then what would be on the devices or on the clouds, and how far apart for lighting, and then how do we organize the MEP pipe and wire above the clouds. And so you see cable tray with duct and pipe and line voltage actually in the cable tray, and we had to go through some permitting hurdles for that. But this ended up became the organizing element. Just some other pictures. So as that evolves, and now we're well down the design path, we're going to put this in the buildings. We've got mock-ups done, and the architect says, well, gosh, I have another project. Do you think I could use these there, or could we study them on another project? And as we were, in the build community, or certainly our general contractor was talking to others and what was going on, and there was a little bit of buzz about, gee, are we going to offer these to other projects after this work is done? And we did some hard thinking, and we decided yes. And so we launched a company called Overcast Innovations to do that. And that journey, we have not ever developed a product before, especially an architectural product. And so then the iterations we had to go through of, okay, well, what all the systems, besides just what we did in our building, what systems could land or be involved in clouds? We knew what we went through to change the who does what during design, procurement, off-site work, and on-site work on our projects, but we had to be much more thoughtful, because when you bring these ceiling clouds to a project, it changes the who is designing the component, who is providing it, who's commissioning it, and so on. So we had to be ready for a design team to help them work through these changes. Otherwise, what could be a good idea for a project would just get stopped because it's difficult to understand how to put it into the project. When the architect now is moving ceiling clouds and the lighting is on the cloud, in some respects, that complicates the photometric analysis on a project, because now the architect is just moving lights as they move a cloud. And so we added photometric analysis in our team in case that was a need on a project, in case the lighting designer or electrical designer wanted that to just stay with the cloud design on the project. We did a lot of acoustical analysis so that as we added different finishes on clouds, that the architects could have information for the acoustic absorption of the clouds. We certainly were in the seismic zone, so we added seismic options for the structural system of the cloud. And then we looked at different configurations that architects might want, either need or enjoy the opportunity to have, rather than just one or two sizes or shapes. And then we went through lots of different finish options that we could provide. And then one of the hardest parts was actually looking at all of the IoT and data intelligence on the clouds. And that is one of the big opportunities, is that it comes as a system with IoT. And so we had to be ready for all of the low voltage and wireless information. And then one of the last things we had to do was help with draft documents for the change in contracting on projects when all of a sudden there still are the mechanical, electrical consultants, installers, and so on, but now you've moved the cheese on everybody's plate for who's going to either provide or design or install various parts of systems. And so we've done a lot of work to be ready for teams to go through the process of being contracted appropriately. And then we have found in this journey, we have now several OEM relationships with our factory, so that as we provide a cloud, we're working direct with the factory for lighting or temperature sensors or so on. And we're starting to see how much markup there is in the supply chain that we deal with on all of our other projects, and one reason why building costs so much. And so there's a lot of opportunity as you move off-site with manufacturing to take some of the cost layers out. We also saw, certainly on our project and the others we're involved in, how many ladder trips are saved when you use this kind of a system. That's a significant topic. And some other benefits, it really did change the critical path on the schedule, so it was a little shorter critical path. Commissioning in the end was easier because the systems were, one, pre-commissioned, all the devices off-site, but we also had to have more finite designs of all of the in-ceiling work to support the off-site manufacturing of the MEP pipe and wire and cable trays. So that was a big benefit. And the projects now that we're involved in are penciling out. Ours, we held cost neutral. We had a lot of R&D and startup costs to do this, but these really can be cheaper on a project as well. And we've now looked at other kinds of uses. Certainly, these can be in a suspended ceiling. They don't need to be just in a type of occupancy with no ceiling. You can get some pretty interesting techie looks. We're getting a lot of interest from life science applications because we can add the hookups in the cloud. And then, the idea was, with the utility as our partner, that these buildings, and certainly, they've got to go through a shakeout period, and we do need to operate at zero energy, and these are a living lab kind of an idea. But the team of the logos there on the screen went together. These buildings were up and running. We had launched the Eco District in partnership with the utility. We launched EDO in partnership with the utility. We have lots of other capabilities, the utility and these other companies. And so this team competed for a DOE grant for a neighborhood scale grid connected buildings operation project, and this team won. So now the operations group that was formed and headquartered around these two buildings is now getting to expand expertise by working in a larger neighborhood in cooperation with the utility and with DOE. So for a recap, again, we set aside some budget. We, I think the quote from some of the design team was, this is the first project that they heard yes more often than they heard no. So we always tried to find a way to make time for ideas that came up. And then, what started as steel and concrete, and then we went CLT, and then now passive house, and then we had an eco district, and then we went zero energy, we went zero carbon, and now we have this living lab. And then, building is battery, and you can see on the screen here, this was a decision at a time. It wasn't, we didn't start zero energy, zero carbon. We didn't start that with an operations group in mind. We didn't start with lots of these ideas, But what we found is at any point on this path, if we had said no, all of the downstream opportunities would have been lost or not been an option. The same thing here as we looked at the tenant improvement. Certainly, we just like the seamless delivery from a developer point of view of keeping control of the TI work. But in this case, it actually allowed us to come up with this cloud idea. And that ultimately has gone on to be a separate company for us with the market launch. These green items, either on this project became separate companies for us and separate new offerings or enhanced offerings. So, we certainly have done a lot of zero carbon work, but now with these buildings and the DOE grant and so on, we now have a substantially more in-depth capability in zero carbon that we're offering to customers. And, the punchline on this is we got it in on time, and that was significant because this project started in January of 2019, and so we were in COVID and had to get this project finished during COVID. So that was a big challenge, but we got in on time and we stayed on budget and we kept a market rate return. There's certainly more expense that we put into the project that we could have saved and increased the returns beyond what we had told the investors in the beginning. But rather than, what we did is at every chance, rather than increasing returns, we just kept the market rate return and we spent the money to get this outcome. So McKinstry, taking on this project, now our org chart has these other companies involved, and you see other really important partners here on the screen. This is, don't do this alone. You need really good partners helping. So thank you. And are there any questions?
Doug, that was so fantastic. I'm going to invite our audience to put any questions they might have either by raising their hand or putting questions in the chat box. But I have a question about the very beginnings, and it may seem hard to remember back in the day, but when you started the project, what made you decide to earmark the funds in the beginning for innovation? Like, it seems to me you must have had to argue that with somebody who was like, yeah, no, what are you talking about? How can you earmark for something we don't know? It's just so contrary to how we think about budgeting.
Well, we're a design builder, and we have a lot of scale in that part of our business. And we've been around since 1960 and engineering sort of from day one. And so we've been in a lot of early conversations where other team members have brought up ideas that seem have a lot of validity, or where we have brought them up, and where often it's, okay, we're interested, but only if you do all this due diligence on your own nickel and bring it back to us, then will we say yes or no? And so a lot of ideas get unverified or don't really get vetted well unless you fund them. And so that's our experience when we're on the contractor side of the table. And so it's our own self-interest that caused us to say, hey, if only developers would have an allowance set aside that they're really willing to spend for really good ideas that may likely have an ROI of their own. They just need the initial money to invest in it, to find out, so that they can then say yes. So that was really where that came from.
It's such an enlightened approach. And I know we have people on the call. I can see who some of our attendees are, and they're probably wondering, okay, we're not acting as developers. We serve in other parts of the process. How do we pitch our next project on, let's do a reserve fund for innovation? And if you were to advise them, again, you are sort of both hats, being the owner developer, what would you tell them? What would sell you when you are wearing your developer hat?
Well, I think, developers who are repeat developers are really experienced at going through, ROI, different kinds of return, internal rate of return, and so on. And they might have their threshold of what's acceptable for rates of return. But as an initial way to sell the set aside is, would you put aside money that is used for items that pay back within your financial parameters? Just tell us what the parameters are. But the way you need to kick those off is initially with a little consulting study. And of course, you might end up funding some studies that didn't go anywhere. But in the whole, all that money can easily be paid back within a financial criteria that they define if they'll just show people that they have the money to spend against cost savings. Now, ours was a broader topic than that. We did a lot of items that were not necessarily cost saving. So we used different criteria per se. But I think a way to get in the conversation, and we know this from our ESCO business, we've had our energy services group come into regular, traditional design, bid, build projects where we're the contractor. We just get the job and we'll bring our energy efficiency team in and they'll show ROI paybacks of enhanced features on a new construction project that the developer can still choose at that point in the project. So it's not hard to come up with ideas that pay back. It just has to be part of the ethos of the project. And that's where somebody could bring that up.
Oh, that's really powerful. The Center for Innovation's been engaged in conversations with people in the Ukraine about the rebuilding efforts there. And I think that the challenges that people in the Ukraine are suffering through now, especially from an energy perspective, are really in the forefront of the way that many of us think. I've also heard people say that there's an opportunity that has come out of the misery and the horror of the war to actually rethink the energy structure and how energy is delivered in that country, since so much of their existing infrastructure has been destroyed by the Russians. And I'm just wondering if President Zelensky called you and said, hey, how should we approach this? What general advice might you give him about how to think about creating a more self-sufficient energy system in a country that's had much of their energy infrastructure devastated?
Yeah, well, I think it's, neighborhood scale thinking for energy is not a new idea. It just is often hard to adopt in existing neighborhoods. But, in a war-torn country, certainly, as they're rebuilding their energy infrastructure, that's the kind of idea that could come up. This building, in new construction, you have all the opportunity to have significantly lower thermal requirements for buildings. So, that certainly was a big opportunity for us. But the existing neighborhoods in Ukraine or here in America, the existing infrastructure, it really is all about crushing demand and looking at the many ways you can do that, and then looking at how you actually change the load profile, with renewables and so on. So I don't know. That's a pretty challenging question.
Definitely. It's a challenging question for those of us on the West Coast where it's not even 9 a.m. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I know, it's just one tough situation over there.
Yeah. Thinking about other presidents, we, here in the United States, we have a president who's really committed to investing in a new energy future due to his belief and support in defeating climate change, or at least stabilizing our movement towards zero carbon. And I'm just wondering about how you imagine the implementation of some of the American policies, which are starting, I guess, sometime next year, might impact our energy use and what ideas you might have for people in the audience about how best to do that.
Well, gosh, the existing building stock, I mean, we really do believe half the energy is wasted in America. Because, and, there's all kinds of new buildings, but that's only, 1 or 2% of the building stock every year. And so all of these existing buildings that are either 5 years old, 15 years old, 50 years old, 100 years old, having the policies in play that encourage efficiency work in buildings to, every building is on a path to net zero, whether the building owner knows it or not. Eventually it will happen. The challenge is a lot of building owners can only do it when it's cost effective, meaning they have to borrow the funds and the funds have to be paid back. And that's what a typical energy services company does. And we do that and provide those kind of services. But there's a lot of properties out there that are owned where a building owner doesn't know how long they will keep the property, and to hedge their bet, gosh, I might sell it in 5 years, I might sell it in 15 years. But if I were to sell it in 5 years, I might not get the payback if I spend some money, if it's a 15-year payback item or suite of services on a building. So decoupling, having the building debt for the improvements stay with the building is in a long-term and patient capital way is important from a policy point of view. And there's some types of programs out there, PACE and so on, that is intended to do that, to where the borrowed funds act sort of like a property tax and get passed on. Any debt that's not yet paid off goes to the next property owner, so that it doesn't have to get cleared up and all paid off by the owner of the building in the sale. So anyway, there's policy around financing, there's policy around providing grants to encourage the building stock to get going. There's so on a net present value, the jobs created, the taxes that come in and so on, there's $1 trillion a year or something like that available in improving the building stock of America, and it pays for itself in energy savings, and it pays for itself for the policy work to get it going because of all the jobs created and so on. But it has to be at a federal level to get that much incentive going.
Well, we're very optimistic about it. I think, yeah, it's really great. So one last question. I think we have a couple of technology people on the calls who are involved in startups. And I know that your company creates its own products and sort of starts it up internally, but you also do some other investing in other startups. And I wonder if you could just talk about the lens at which you think about whether to make an investment in startups.
Wow. So that in the last half decade for us has really changed here at McKinstry. So I started on a journey 7 or 8 years ago, trying to find startups at conferences. I was doing 7 or 8 conferences a year and focusing on the ones that often had trade shows or vendors there I could talk to, looking for emerging companies, emerging technology. For me, initially, it was just to see the trends that were accelerating in the built environment. But then it was interesting to start finding, oh, you're a startup and you're looking to collaborate with a company. You need somebody to test ideas with. Well, we might be a good candidate. And then also we started finding startups who were actually in our backyard, but I had to find them in Vegas or Miami or something to even know they were here in Seattle. So we spend now a lot of time. I just spent 3 days in Miami at a venture conference for prop tech and build tech and construction tech. And so we spend a lot of time trying to know who's out there sort of at the startup stage, what's the technology? Not only might we be a candidate, but we're really interested to offer help when we can. The built environment is not going to get there if we don't all work together to collaborate and share ideas. And so, if we have ideas that a startup could use, great. Maybe we were even a good beta site for startups, and we have done some investments as well for strategic investments for the company. So what used to be a non-issue at all for us now is front and center, and we actually have a group we call Dawson Labs, and that's where our early stage startups reside in that operating group. And their charter is to be close to startups in the industry and to seek them out. So we spend a lot of time now in that area.
That's so interesting. It's so forward thinking, the work that you're doing. Doug, I think we've come to the end of our time together, and I can't tell you what a wonderful morning it's been. Your kindness and generosity of spirit and what you shared with us is just so remarkable and so inspirational. So thank you to you personally for what you're doing, as well as your whole team at McKinstry. It's so inspiring and so forward-looking. So we can't thank you enough.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
I want to close by saying today is the last day also that our amazing Katie Olson will be joining us. She's leaving her work at the center to follow other passions, and we wish her well on her new journey. It's been wonderful to work with Katie, and we really look forward to hearing about all her future successes. Thank you so much for all your time and care, Katie. We so appreciate it. And for you, our listening audience, please enjoy a lovely and peaceful holiday season. A special thanks to all of our sponsors who make all of this possible, and to you, our community of innovators, for all that you do to transform our industry for all of us. Happy holidays, everyone.